Good day, Junior Tickies. This is Mrs. DeMailon speaking, and today we are going to start a new chapter, Reconciliation of the Control Accounts. Now, reconciliation is the checking that the list is equal to the control account. In other words, the debtors or the creditors list or the debtors or creditors ledger is equal to the general ledger accounts, the debtors control account, or the creditors control account. And this is known as an internal control measure to make sure that we verify the transactions, that if we pick up any mistakes or identify fraud. And this is why we do this on a monthly basis. So, what is the procedure when we do our control accounts, or what is the accounting cycle? Now we start with the documents given to the debtors, in other words, our invoices, our receipts or creditors notes. So everything starts with the transactions or credit transactions, either sales or purchases. Most of the time, the focus of the recon here is with the debtors, but it can also be the creditors. So depending on you're working with debtors or creditors, but you start with your invoices, your receipts, your credit notes, your debit notes, your EFT transactions. Then we enter it into the correct journal. In other words, the debtors journal, debtors allowance journal, CRJ, CPJ, creditors journal, creditors allowance journal. Then we post the totals to the debtors or the creditors control account in the general ledger at the end of the month. And we post the individual transactions to the debtor or the creditor's ledger's account. In other words, to P. Williams's account or to the account of whatever traders or whoever we are dealing with. So technical limited supplies, whatever their name is. So we then will post all Williams transactions that happened during month to Williams's account, or all the Technics limited transactions that we dealt with to their account. And then eventually, if you balance your debtors control account in the general ledger, then that balance must equal the total of all the debtors or creditors at the end of the month. So if you're working with a debtors ledger, the debtors control account must equal all the debtors added together. Or if we're working with creditors, the total of all the creditors at the end of the month in the list must equal the balance of the creditors control account. Now, there are certain steps that we have to follow when we do our reconciliation. So firstly, we are going to check that all the calculations have been done accurately. In other words, you're going to just add up and subtract and see if the balances were added up correctly, subtraction was done correctly, and the balances is what the figures that are there is actually added and subtracted correctly. Then we're going to check if certain items in the control accounts are in the correct place. In other words, are the debits on the right side or the credits on the right side? So this is very important, the layout of your T accounts. So if we're working with an asset, we have debtors control, balance, debit brought down, sales on the debit side, and then on the credit side, the payments from the debtors or the receipts from the debtors and the allowances, and so forth. And then thirdly, we are going to then check if there was any errors or omissions. So step 3 and 4 is normally given to you in the form of a transactions or errors and omissions, little adjustments that we have to take into account and fix the errors or add the omissions or make allowance for whatever mistake they picked up. So step 3 and 4 is normally given to you in the additional information that you have to add. So if we then look, before we then continue to the first activity, there's sort of steps. So depending on where the error occurs, depends on where you're going to fix it. So if the error is in the source document or the journal, it means that our very first step is wrong. So everything is wrong. So you're going to have to then fix the control and the list because everything is wrong. If the totals of the journals are wrong, the general ledger needs to be fixed. So you need to then fix the control accounts. However, if they talk about an individual posting to the debtor or creditor's account is wrong, then it means you need to fix the list only. So you have to have this layout or this diagram in your mind the entire time when you're dealing with this. So please have your theory booklet next to you when you do these activities so you can refer to these diagrams and the steps on the previous slide the entire time we are looking at the activity. So the first activity 1 says, redo the debtors control account and the debtors list, considering all the information so that the two will be reconciled. In other words, reconciled means they must be equal at the end. You are provided with the information of JT traders at the end of the month, July 2020. Below, you will find the debtors control account and the list. The balance of the control account and the list do not agree. So you can see we have 16,996 as a balance, but in the list is a total of 15,036 Rand. So at the moment, something is wrong and we need to go and fix it so that that balance here and this total of the list equals out eventually. So at the moment, they do not agree, and that is why we need to do the reconciliation. So the first transaction says, additional information. G. Smith's account was undercast by 1,000 Rand. So in other words, the person's account, so the debtor's account was under. So we have to add by correcting. Now, normally, I've just added this bracket here to show you what to do, but it obviously will not be part of your activity. So you have to, what should we do now? Fix the under by correcting the adding. So we have to correct the adding in the debtor's account because the mistake was in the debtor's account. So we have to correct only the list. Then the next transaction, so you're going to add 1,000 Rand in the list or to G. Smith's account. Then an invoice sent to C. Black for 400 Rand has not yet been entered. It's not entered anywhere. So the document is missing. So because that the document is missing, it's missing from the journal, and therefore it wasn't posted to control account. It wasn't posted to the individual's account. So it must be entered in both the control account and the list. Then, and an invoice, remember now you have to go back to basics. What does an invoice do to the account? We have to increase that person's account. So it's going to plus. So guys and girls, you have to go back to basics. Know what source document has what effect on the accounts. So an invoice means we had a credit sale, so it increases their debt. So we're going to have to plus C. Black's account and plus the control account for sales. The debtor's journal was undercast by 500 Rand. So because the journal total was wrong, the error was totaling, therefore you'll only fix the control account. So you're going to undercast means you're going to have to add 500 Rand into the control account. Then, an invoice for 700 Rand sent to A. Brown for goods sold had been entered in the debtor's journal but had not been posted to A. Brown's account. So in other words, the control account's fine because the journal is correct. So what should we do? We should now only post to Brown's account to fix it. Lastly, and remember, before we get to the last one, the invoice sent to him means that he bought more on credit, so he's going to owe more. So we're going to increase Brown's account. Lastly, the bookkeeper had forgotten to post the total of 760 Rand in the debtor's allowance journal to the debtor's control account. So The journal wasn't posted. Therefore, the control account was wrong. So the total wasn't posted. So the control account needs to be fixed. So when we then start with the activity itself, you always start with a basic layout. So you start with a balance on the first, brought down 15,988. And because I didn't tell you that it was incorrect, you can copy it down. And then each debtors list, you start with an opening value, and that is from the information given to you. So you start with the balances or the totals they give you at the beginning of the activity. And then we're going to start and enter each transaction as it goes. So the first transaction, before we get to the first transaction, is now you need to know your layout of your ledger account off by heart. So you need to know that sales, DJ is on the debit side, bank and discount allowed, CRJ is on the credit side. And we have to then add on. So the first transaction was where C. Smith's account was left out. So it was left out of his account, the invoice. So we have to add 1,000 Rand. And that's all where we're going to fix it because the control account was fine. The next transaction involved sales. The sales was wrong, or the invoice was left out completely. So now we have to add 400 Rand to Black's account and to the sales account because the entire transaction was left out because the document was not recorded properly. So you're going to have to add the 400 Rand there for sales. How do I know it's a sales transaction? Because it was an invoice, and an invoice links to a credit sale transaction. And then credit sales or invoices must increase the debtor's debt, so plussing on his account. Then the next transaction was that the sales column was under cost, so you're going to have to add 500 Rand into the sales column. And then the next transaction was that Brown's account was left. So an invoice was left out of Brown's account. So you're going to just add the 700 Rand to Brown's account. Then they tell us that the debtor's allowance column total was not posted to the control account. So you're going to have to just add in debtor's allowances, DAJ, 790 Rand. Now, if you knew your layout, you would have immediately seen that the debtor's allowances is missing. And you could have already wrote in right from the start, you could have said debtor's allowances, DAJ. And then when you go through the transactions, then just add the total of 790 Rand. So my suggestion is that you start from the beginning by writing down the full layout or the full format of the debtor's control account, which by now you should know off by heart. You need to be able to write it down from memory. Otherwise, this section is going to be very confusing and very difficult. So it was left out, so what we do is we add it in. Then what is now left to do is that we have to now just finish up the totaling and balancing of the accounts. So for each transaction, you now close the bracket here with the 8,888 plus the 400 plus 500 gives us a total of 9,788. The bank and discount allowed was unchanged, so you copy the same amount as from the beginning of the activity, 7,880. And then what you should do is balance off the account of the debtor's control. So how do I balance again? You add the total debits together and get a total of 25,776. And then you carry that over to the other side. And then you must minus off the credits to get your balance carried down. So the 25,776 minus 7,880 minus 790 gives us a balance carried down of 17,136 Rand. And then that balance carried down becomes your new balance brought down at the beginning of the month. And now what should we do? Are we done? No, we're not. We should total up the list as well. So each debtor, you just do your sum and you close brackets and you find the final answer. So 4,146 Rand plus 1,000 Rand gives us a final total for Smith of 5,146 Rand. And so you continue for each debtor and you find the new total. And at the end, what should you do? Add them all together to find the new total of the list at the end of the month. So total of the list on the 31st of March is, in other words, equal to your balance carried down, and that will then also become the opening total in the new month. So are we now done? Yes. Why? Because the balance carried down at the end of, or brought down at the beginning of April, and here in the list is equal. So our control account equals our list. Therefore, our reconciliation is done. And we now know that no mistakes has been left out and no errors are not are just forgotten about, and that everything has been taken into account. And internally, everything is fine and checks out. So thank you so much. I hope that this opens a new sort of section for you guys, and we are going to continue with activity 2, where we are going to do the reconciliation of the creditors control account and the creditors list. Thank you and goodbye from Mrs. de Mailon.